Today we're going to talk about big data, and in the course of preparing for this chat, I or some of my colleagues looked up some facts on data and big data to give this talk a bit of context. And apparently more data has been created in the past 2 years than in the entire history of the human race. The worldwide value of data by 2019 is estimated by IDC to be upwards of $100 billion US, which is, whether that's right or wrong, it's currently estimated to be double that value is double what is currently the value at the moment. But really interestingly, about only 0.5% of worldwide data is actually used and analysed. So what that means is that there's a lot of data out there, not a lot of it is being analysed and used, and that of course presents a huge opportunity as well as a set of risks. And hopefully today we'll cover a lot of that gap and looking at opportunities and risks. But for me, as a mere competition lawyer, I've heard a lot about big data, but I'm not entirely sure exactly what it is. And I'd be grateful for some of the panelists who are dealing with data day in, day out can tell me or to enlighten us generally on what they think big data is and its use. So, Mike.
So the way I always describe big data, and I actually get asked that question a lot, really the whole big data thing is a movement. It's a movement sort of started by the fact that a lot of companies for many, many years were trying to do things, understand their data better and try to build models and be personalised to their customers, but we're really struggling to do anything meaningful with the current set of technologies and techniques that are out there. For many years, people have been trying to do the whole single customer view, the 360 view of the customer, and really struggling to really do that when it comes to bringing lots of different types of data together. So a couple of pioneers introduced some new technologies, said, right, I've had enough of this, I'm going to build something myself to look at the data in a different way. And they open sourced that software, made it available to the public, a community was built around it, other companies built some other technologies, and slowly but surely there was this movement where industry and organisations started to say, actually, if we use this, we can start to do some of the things we were really struggling with before. And on a parallel to that, there was R&D functions really using things like machine learning to try to build models and do propensity models and to understand, say, the propensity of someone buying something. And their challenge was always the fact that they couldn't get enough data in their systems. So combine the new systems that come out with machine learning, and suddenly the opportunities for business to suddenly leverage these things become huge. And as they have started to do that with personalization, recommendations, the whole kind of buzz has come about. But really, this is just really businesses trying to solve business challenges.
Justin?
Yeah, I'd say that big data is really a consequence, as you said. The last 2 years more data has been collected. So why is that? It's fundamentally a consequence of the distribution and decentralization of computing powers. So we're all walking around with these computers in our pockets and on our watches and all this sort of stuff, and with the ability to collect that data and store it in a cheaper way than ever before. Suddenly all this data is out there on us, okay? And so all our behaviours are being digitized the whole time. Where we are, what we're doing, what we respond to, the emails that we click, the websites that we see. And that creates I think, massive opportunity. And it's an opportunity, I think, to solve some of the problems that we have both in business but also in society by collecting all that data together. I'm less worried about the sort of privacy issues and the personalization of that data, because actually it doesn't matter whether it's Justin's data or Mike's data. Actually, it's all of our data collectively being tracked through this decentralization of computing power to be able to actually see real answers to real problems. And that's what I think is big data, and that's its opportunity.
Okay. Is there Jason, I know you deal a lot in the insurance sector. Is there a particular take that the sector has, or is it as nebulous as some of the concepts that are out there?
Well, so taking a step back, I'd say what is data and big data? It's actually what you described right at the beginning, which is there's a lot of it, and it kind of just started collecting, and people started saying, well, hang on a second, what should we actually do with it? And working in insurance, one of the biggest challenges is actually a little bit to opposite view to Justin's point, which is actually who owns the data. And if you look at in insurance, the same data just keeps going through various different entities of the value chain. That if you're a consumer, where is your data actually stored and kept by whom? But actually, if you're in insurance, every entity within that chain believes that that's their data, and they want to protect it. So actually, in insurance, it's quite interesting that data is all about data protection and not necessarily sharing it, because they see that starting to become a differentiator for them. But actually, big data is kind of just happened a little bit in the background, and nobody really knew that it was happening. And then all of a sudden, we've just found all of these mega data centers full of stuff, and we've got emails flying around, social media, technology. And we've just seen interaction of a new generation coming in who want to interact in a different way. Now, I don't necessarily like buying everything online, but if I look at certain other people, they don't want to talk to anybody. You look at other people, they want to speak to call centers. So all of this kind of connection has changed the environment and the way that we talk and deal with people. So I like the way that Mike described big data as a movement, because I think it's about culture and behavior. And actually, it's all about insight. So data's great, but what do you do with it? If it has no value, why? But we've also seen great commercialization and new businesses come out of data.
So Jason, thank you for that. So Christian, in the regulatory context, from your point of view, how do we deal with quite a nebulous concept, a movement, when you're trying to regulate or think about regulating a movement? I mean, is there something around how the regulators approach big data that you could lend some insight onto?
Well, we've already spoken a lot about personal data, and naturally, data protection is the big issue that has to be looked at from a regulatory perspective. But not all big data necessarily has to be personal data. So if you look at weather data, for example, it's also a sort of big data when you do weather forecast. And it's got no issue in that. But of course, all the sexy stuff, when you think about big data, is personal data. I find it has not only this regulatory aspect to it, but it has a second layer as well, and that is how society accepts it, how it is treated, how consumers or data subjects as data protection calls the individuals are perceiving it, and I find it an additional challenge for companies to cover this aspect as well. And it is very different when you look at specific countries, for example. Coming from Germany, even if you're at the airport looking around, there are, I think, about a tenth of surveillance cameras that are here. Here, this is totally accepted. Back at home, it's looked upon more in a differentiated way. People are more freaked out by big data. So I think personally is this kind of challenge that companies have to take into account, that it is also accepted. And actually, giving back that kind of question, what is your experience when it comes to taking this into account? What do you think? How important is it that it's not only compliant from a regulatory perspective, but also accepted by the individuals? Is that something, for example, in the insurance sector that's...
So I'm going to use an analogy of cars. So anybody who knows me knows I enjoy driving cars and I like fast cars. But I pick cars as a key thing because as a driver and a consumer, I enjoy driving my car. And the way I drive my car, and the speed I drive my car, which is always in the speed limit, by the way, just so we're clear, is my data. However, and I won't name manufacturers' names, but most brands, if you buy a relatively new car now, are kind of connected, and they've got hard drives on them, collecting information and pushing it all over the place. And I'm kind of saying as an individual, but this is my data, isn't it? And they're saying, no, but that's their data because it's about the car and how it's performing, because when I take it to the garage, they plug in and it shows all these wonderful graphs. So data ownership, I think, depending on where you're coming from and the protection and regulation, and it's a minefield when you look at it in different countries and geographies. Even if we look within Europe, which collectively is supposed to have a particular way, when you look at different industries, different sectors, and you look at the regulation, even within countries, there's a common layer, and then there's specific country layers. I mean, you know, you could probably, that's a lot of data, to be fair. And seeing and trying to wear that myriad out is actually quite a complicated thing. So you could take the kind of view of, actually, I'm not going to worry about it too much, or you can kind of spend your life at the other end of the spectrum trying to work it out. And I think there's a balance in the middle depending on the type of data that you're dealing with. Because I think people are less concerned about certain types of data than they are about others. And insurance in particular, I think personal data people worry about. In my car and my driving habits, well, if I go 75 miles an hour, do I really want anybody else to know? I'm not sure I do. So it's kind of getting that balance right.
I think the question of ownership is sometimes it sometimes just overshadows the real question, which is really about what you're doing with the data and be it what you can do with the data. So the question of ownership might be around, actually, I don't feel comfortable with that company doing what they're choosing to do with that data because I feel like it's personal to me. It's not really about ownership.
Yeah.
But it also may be about, actually, I also would like that data because given that I've contributed, or you, in your case, you bought the car, for instance, you have a right to use it as well.
Yeah.
And do what you like with it. And I think ownership comes down to, the question of ownership comes down to the opportunities that people want to leverage with it and using the data or protecting how it's used. And we see it a lot in terms of a number of discussions I've had around with companies. And in fact, I run a session a while back where there was loads of different kind of marketeers and customer-facing business people and said, we just got them to discuss certain subjects, and we said, if you're using personalisation and recommendations, we asked them to say, well, answer the question, if I was transparent with my customers about what I'm doing with the data, they would trust my brand more. And there was a very 50-50 view across the audience around whether they would trust them more or less. And actually what it boiled down to was the strength of the brand and how trusting they felt the consumer was with that brand itself, not necessarily what they were choosing to do with the data. And I think it just raises the fact that everyone's very nervous about being transparent with it, but everyone is kind of recognising that now in today's age, and going back to one of the points that was raised earlier, there is almost an expectation from certain generations at least that they are going to get certain functionality on their phone that's going to tell them exactly where the next train is and exactly where they are and where everything is and where the things relevant to them are. And if I don't recognise this number on my phone, it's going to give me a prediction about who it thinks it is. Those things are almost, people expect that experience now, but you can't do that without doing some of the analysis that we talked about
doing. For me, people are on a spectrum from, you've got real privacy zealots, which are very, very, in my experience, like 5% of the population are real like, okay, I don't want anybody knowing anything about me, I want to opt out of everything. They have a very loud voice, they tend to form a lot of the lobbyists, talking about the privacy regulations and things like that. Everybody else is sort of on a spectrum of benefit. And so you have millennials on one side who will put everything online and will not think anything about it at all. And what they're looking for is they're looking for all that advanced functionality. They want their phones to be able to predict what they're doing, right? And they get huge value from it. And everybody else is sort of on a spectrum. And in order to bridge that spectrum, what I think you've got to do is you do have to be transparent. So you need to say what you're doing. You need to be clear on what the benefit is. And I think the ultimate, for me, the ultimate cut through all of it is if my name is on that data set, it's my data. And I don't care if the bank's got it, I don't care if the insurer's got it, I don't care if the health person's got it, I don't care if the doctor's got it. As long as it's connected to me, it's my data. And I think that is the thing. So if you look at the data that I use a lot of, which is credit reporting data, that was shared, when it started to be shared sort of 30 years ago, the banks got together and they said, okay, this is our data and we're going to share it in order to predict risk better. And what's happened over the last 10 years is that as it's become sort of pervasive in society, that data is checked every time you go and do almost anything now, from a mobile phone contract through to taking out a loan, the consumer's saying, well, actually, it's my data and I want to have a look at it. And actually, it's the exact opposite from you. You know, that is the bank saying it's my data and we're going to share it, and actually the consumer is now saying, actually, I want to have a look at it. And that's a huge opportunity, actually, because if you look at credit reports, for example, a third of them have mistakes on it. So if you haven't seen your credit report, the chances are a third of you have mistakes on your credit report, right? Now, what's the best way to clean that? Is it to do like massive single customer view things and try and integrate it all and get one half of the bank to talk to the other half of the bank? No, that's impossible, right? What you do is you go to the customer and you say, here's your data, have a look at it. Are there mistakes on it? And you decentralize that process. And that's what I think needs to happen. And for me, the data is owned by the data subject. It is their data.
And it's interesting because if you look at, say, healthcare, where actually, you know, the government has a view that we're protecting the people in this country, and we have all their health data, we're protecting that data. We don't want it to get into the wrong hands. We're protecting it on behalf of every individual because it's their data. But we're doing a project right now where we're predicting or trying to predict the outcomes that someone who suffers from type 2 diabetes, what they may get as an outcome. And actually getting hold of the primary and secondary care data from some of the organisations we've been speaking to has been incredibly difficult. In fact, it's taken us nearly a year to get a data sharing agreement to get pseudonymised data, which isn't even has any personal information in. And actually, if we said to them, look, we have half a dozen people who have type 2 diabetes, and they would happily sign something to say, you can have all of our data because we really believe in what you're doing. And the response we got back was, no, we can't give it to you because they're not well enough informed about the risks. So in fact, they're trying to protect the data, but they're actually completely stifling innovation because they're too scared to give it out. So it's almost the other way.
Do you think that is because of regulations, or do you think it's because of lacking trust?
Partly regulations, but in their case, it's probably media hype and scaremongering that's actually stopping people. They're just too nervous to say yes.
No, so do you think this is about education for the consumer, not only with the rights, but also education around the fact that used responsibly, this data can be used well and for benefit for them?
Without a doubt, I think education is key in this whole thing, and I think you alluded to it earlier on. I mean, we have to be much clearer about what big data is. What do we mean when we say we're going to be analysing your data? Because a lot of the techniques about analysing data is saying let's take the collective of all the data, and based on it all, we're going to build up some models that kind of say, well, based on everyone, you kind of probably fit into this bracket, so we're going to recommend this to you. And it's not about Big Brother looking at you, but a lot of the discussions around big data and machine learning and AI as a term is all kind of built around that nervousness about companies doing something kind of almost Big Brother-y, and it's not really like that at all.
Well, I think that goes back to the culture and behaviour. And I think the point that you both made in slightly different ways, which is what are we trying to do with it and what value does it actually have? But I think it raises that question where it's are we better as a collective rather than an individual for everybody's benefit, which is a different way of thinking about it. And until that, I almost think regulation is a way of hiding behind some of these things. However, is it wrong that the British National Health Service is trying to protect our data? Well, probably at this moment in time, not a bad thing. I'm not sure that's a bad behaviour. But is it wrong for them to share that data with somebody who can get some insights to help improve the care of people? Does that break and do those things? So I think it's what big data has done, and that's why I like the description of the movement, is it's starting to raise questions that we've never had to deal with before. These are new questions. They're not prescriptive answers to them. And so we're having to work out, as we're going along, how to deal with this. And different entities are responding in different ways. So whether it's government saying, let's put a data protection law in, or an industry putting regulation in, However, technology is driving and accelerating at such a change. It's doing things that we could only dream of before.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance between, creating the right regulations and policies and rules. There's a fine balance between kind of keeping that protection and doing it the right way, and not stifling innovation, because it's very easy to come up with the wrong term which completely destroys a lot of businesses who are not going to do anything bad with the data, but stops them from doing anything.
And I think we've already seen it, whether it's Facebook or Google versus the Apple model of looking at things, and Apple being a very closed ecosystem. But people already, and if I look at insurance, they are InsureTech startups are utilising Facebook data because they're allowed to.
Yeah.
Because if you sign up to Facebook, you sign up to that data being allowed to be shared. Now, how many millions of people around the world are on Facebook? So clearly there isn't an issue at an individual level within certain demographics of people, whether it's more at the millennium end than the rest of the spectrum. So we're already seeing different models and different ways of dealing with that, rather than one consistent way of dealing with that, I think.
I mean, it's an interesting point that you raise about innovation and access to data, in the sense that I think as a competition lawyer, and I know there's some competition regulators in the room, I think one of the things that the regulators and I think the industry struggles with is when it comes to data, access to data. At one extreme, there could be free access to data that everybody gets hold of, that innovation and then new entrants come in, market disruptors come in. But on the other side, if you're an incumbent, if you're an existing player that has a lot of data, there may be a disincentive to innovate if your innovation is then taken by somebody that just jumps on the bandwagon. Do you guys have I know it's a difficult, there's no right answer, but it seems that there's quite a lot of grey areas on access to information at one extreme and innovation and how they fit together. I don't know, Justin, do you have a view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that big organisations, as long as they can leverage the data, do have a competitive advantage. There's no doubt about it. If you're sitting there with 8 million current accounts, you've got a huge data set. Now, there's another argument that we were talking about before, which is actually, are those organisations able to actually get any insight out of that data? Whereas smaller companies, newer systems can often do that. But as I'm an entrepreneur, right, and I want to serve my users, and I'm in a much better position now than I was 15 months ago when I launched the business, because I've got 3 million people who've signed up, right? Yeah. I see the power of those 3 million people and what I can do for them now that I have access to that data. 15 months ago, I had nobody, right? And so there is a massive competitive advantage. My view is that if the consumer should have that access to that data. And I think this is where a lot of the sort of financial regulation's going, is that, if the consumer wants to use that data to shop around, to get a better deal, they should be able to have access to that data to power comparisons, to power switching, and that's the way that actually, the market should develop, that it should come through the consumer. And so if the consumer says, access my Facebook data because I want a better insurance quote, they should be allowed to do that, and that should be encouraged by the regulation.
And I think just picking that a little bit further, we're already seeing those differences between different countries. So we all take Money Supermarket, and who's the chap that was on TV Martin Lewis, yeah, telling you change your electricity supplier every 5 minutes, otherwise you're getting robbed. That is pretty commonplace in the UK now.
Yeah.
If we go to Germany, it's very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I can say from Germany is that it seems to be a more difficult market for big data, maybe because of lack of trust. And when you said 5% of the people are on this extremist side of data protection, I think Germany may be slightly more. And the regulatory landscape is not helping, because we have more regulators. They don't agree. And the ICO here in the UK is doing a great job in producing nice brochures, and that kind of maybe are better at guiding businesses and also guiding consumers, whereas in Germany there's still more, I don't know, it's more a fear atmosphere when it comes to big data.
There's also, there's things like, certain rules around having to house your, in Germany, for instance, house data within a German data center, those kind of things.
But that's a good example, because it's one of these society things, perception. It's not required by law. It's just required by maybe the consumers or the customers or companies or whatever.
Well, yeah, exactly. But an awful lot of them have that in place, and actually, it's that kind of thing that is stifling the use of big data. Because it's about bringing data together, and when you can't move it from here or here, how do you bring it together? So and I think a lot of the kind of discussions around GDPR and digital single market and putting rules around that and trying to put clear guidelines around that has been really difficult because of all these different rules and different viewpoints, and some countries being much more open to sharing of data and some not, and when I was in Brussels about a year and a half ago, talking specifically about digital single market and definition of personal data, it was kind of scary. Some of the attempts at describing personal data. I mean, if they actually define it in some of the ways they had thought about, it would be literally saying every piece of data is personal data and you can't do anything with it. And that would just kill innovation completely. So we have to be very careful, I think.
Well, we said earlier that a key is transparency and getting that trust. And I think we have to be clear that the concept of big data, as a sexy as word as it is, I think it's not going to be transformed into something which by itself is seen as something trustworthy and good. So it's always about the companies or the business or the concept or the idea that is being trusted, is being transparent. So not the entire concept. You can't say you need to be more open towards big data. You have to, as a company, I think you have to. You have to tell customers how good it is.
But I still think we keep getting knotted in the same debate, which is we're worrying about things that maybe we don't need to worry about. So what I mean by that is there's certain information which might not be digitized today, but if you wanted to piece somebody's personal profile together, you can go to the electoral register, you can see birth, date, certificate, it's all public information. If you wanted to piece something together, you could probably do it. It'd be really hard. It's not as quick as just saying, yes, I'll give you your Facebook information, which has got all that basic criteria. But I firmly go back to the value point, right? And often the value and insight, we're talking, you can focus a lot on tailoring things for a particular consumer, i.e. me as an individual. What do I like to buy? What type of car? What insurance is best for me as an individual? But a lot of big data's value is insight, which isn't about any single individual. It's actually about trend and insight. So by definition, it probably wouldn't reveal what the source data is actually saying. The question is, are we prepared to give it to somebody to allow them to play around with it, whether it's using AI, machine learning? These are all just mathematical algorithms to find patterns, right? And so technology is just caught up to say, well, let me see what it says. In insurance, we're using machine learning to say, look at claims and say, what are the 3 or 4 key criteria if it was a shipping claim? What are the 3 or 4 things that are the most important things when it comes to claim? Because a claim takes months, years sometimes to deal with. But that doesn't matter, but that's the benefit to everybody.
But how do you deal with that? How do you deal with, and I'm talking about the customer journey in a sense as well, because there's a bit of a gap there between saying, look, if we get the whole data set, and Justin, it'd be great to have your views on this, that we have a whole data set that we can use in loads of really funky ways. Actually, of the data set of 100, 70 or 60% may actually be useful. But there's going to be 30, 40% of stuff that's not going to be useful, but we're going to be going through. How do you, what's the messaging to your customers to say, yes, we may have a lot of your data that may not be useful, but don't worry about that. And again, it sort of goes through to, for me, in a bit of a trust issue, the journey with the customer. I mean, how do you approach that?
So the way we do it, I've actually got a live example, which I've never actually talked about before, but I'll share it here. We asked 10,000 people can we analyse your data on an anonymous basis? And we just wanted to see how many people would opt into that, okay? And we got about a 12% opt-in rate, okay? So 12% of people said, yeah, that's fine. Everybody else rejected it. We then said, so that we tried another version. We said, can we, on an anonymous basis, analyse your data in order to be able to predict whether people are going to get into trouble with debt and then be able to intervene.
Right.
Okay, so a specific use case that is probably quite a altruistic one, you know, that is, we don't, you know, people who are using credit probably don't want other people to get in trouble, and maybe they think, oh, well, actually, I don't want to get into trouble either. Opt-in rate went up to 45%.
Right.
So you see, I think if you're transparent about what you want to do, because actually people don't want the debate about big data and we're going to analyse it. Most average people don't understand what data is. I mean, they're like, what are you talking about? I've just got no idea. And so actually, if you have a debate, if you have a conversation with a customer or with a user about, actually, I want to do it for this, then they can make informed consent. And I think actually that's the way we open it up. But the issue with that is a bit to the insurance thing, your thing of, you know, if you say to, if your BMW car says to you, well, you know, do you want to contribute your data on an anonymous basis so that you can stop accidents? Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, okay, I like that. I might opt into that. But then it buzzes you when you're doing 75 miles an hour. So there's sort of...
Not good, is it?
Yeah, there's sort of... Not that you ever do that. Not that you ever do that. But
70 miles.
Right. But it's sort of... There is a law of unintended consequences that, you know, if you do say one thing and then sort of the output of that many steps down the road is something that freaks the consumer out. Yeah. So I don't have an answer to that, but I think there is that's something that's going to have to sort of get resolved over the next few years as we go down this journey.
It's interesting because I not that I read the Harvard Business Review very often, but Mike, I'll put this one to you because it's sort of on the same theme where the title of the article I read was, you don't need big data, you need the right data. And there was the article ended, I'm just reading from my notes here, that most companies spend too much time at the altar of big data and not really enough time thinking about what the right data is to seek out. Do you think that's valid?
So it's to a degree, yeah. So I mean, we work with many global organisations all over the world in many different industries, and there are very common themes. So firstly, most organisations, when they're embarking on this big data thing, they actually don't really know themselves what this big data thing is, and part of it is about education and telling them and helping them know where to start. And the ones that kind of dismiss that and just go off, the first thing they do is they just get as much data as they can from all over the organisation, they put it into a big data lake, and then say, well, let's start doing stuff with it, and they don't really know what to do with it. And actually, the key thing is driving out what are the business values and the business use cases, going back to your point, Justin, around, you know, what is it that we need to do? What are our business goals? What are our company goals and challenges? What are we really trying to get to? And what would be great? And to really answer that question, you need to have a bit of education and understanding about, you know, what questions you can ask, what's possible. It's not about asking for a report or a metric or a dimension. It's about trying to solve a business problem. And then from there, you can identify what the right data sets might be to start to look at. So I think it's right that it is kind of about a journey and really understanding what you're trying to do before you go and start doing something.
And you have to be slightly careful, because going back to innovation, actually, we've got the technology now where we can throw a load of stuff in and say, tell me what you think. And actually, you might miss something, because you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So you've got to balance that, because otherwise you're stifling innovation, actually, if you try to do it too structured in the way you solve that.
Great, thank you. Look, we're running out of time, but we all wanted to leave a bit of time at the end for Q&A. So has anybody got any questions, burning questions? Yes. Just wait for the mic.
Hi, I'm David Abrahams. I do policy and regulation for tech and telecoms companies. Fascinating panel. I wanted to ask two questions, if I may, and you can skip over one if it's too many. The first one is the definition of personal data, as we've seen in GDPR and things, basically obsolete when there are so many big data sets out there and you can do so much profiling with that that you can probably get to the person without needing the personal data. And then second question is to the competition lawyers. When do you think we might see a first Competition Act case that is really predicated on the control of the data rather than simply a market position?
Okay. Shall I? Well, I'll buy myself some thinking time, and maybe we'll ask Christian to address your first question first.
Whether the definition of personal data is obsolete. I don't think so, because, I mean, I know what you mean. What you mean is everything basically is personal data, so why do we need a definition for? But it's not true. I understand that data protection lures around every corner, but still there's a lot of data which is not personal data, and that makes sense because a lot of the examples that were given today are based on anonymous or pseudonymous data, and this is where you can really do everything. But what is absolutely correct is that because of the fact that there is so much data out there, a lot of the data that was not supposed to be personal data like 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, today is personal data in that definition because it can so easily be linked to other information that then leads to that specific person. So I think the term is still required, but everything that is covered by that term is growing day by day because it's so much easier to make these connections today.
And just very quickly on the competition point, I actually think we may see data as an issue more in the merger space sooner than I think we may see in the sort of pure behavioural space. I mean, clearly data was looked at in Facebook, WhatsApp. You've got Microsoft, LinkedIn going through their merger control process at the moment. How important data is there is still, not necessarily known. I think that in respect to the competition cases, it will require either somebody to, what I'd say, have a dominant position effectively, the data be so essential for a market that, and then there's necessarily an abuse. That's the type of case. I mean, I don't know if we're quite there yet. More interesting, I think, that potentially where you could see some enforcement is where companies are coming together and pooling data. Or ordinarily you'd say, don't speak to your competitor about pricing. But now looking at data pools and common data pools that aren't as obvious that they could be sort of price fixing type cartel activity, maybe you see some type of enforcement in that space because people are looking at ways of getting more data together to then create products. So you asked me when, probably sooner rather than later, but I don't know when later is.
I guess just on what you said, I guess almost a question back really, but what we do see is because of the large organisations that have lots of data and the opportunity, companies that don't necessarily have all the data they could possibly want, but know that they've got some good data, are talking to other companies in a different industry but have data that is useful to both parties and coming together and saying, well, let's share that data so that we can come out with a much better outcome for both of us. And I guess there is questions there, probably to both of you actually, around will there be, first of all, a competition question there from just sharing data, not joining companies, and also data protection perspective, where do you see that going in that respect?
As I said, the data protection is going to be everywhere. So I think I think it's going to be a problem as well. So, sharing data by itself, if it's personal data, you can't just throw it together and then create something new from that. Data protection will hinder you from doing that. So,
yeah. Just on a small point, I think it's quite interesting because we worry about the data protection around it, but given where it's sitting on all the technology and all the hacking and security events we're seeing, for all the protection everybody's putting down on it, it is getting leaked out in instances anyway. So what do we actually mean by data protection? Because we're putting it all
obsolete.
So the whole definition around some of this stuff needs to be looked at, because we're living in a completely different world where the risks are completely different and the way things are actually happening are different. So I keep going back to, we're having to solve and answer questions that we've never had to do before. And that I think is the crux of this, because there is no defined roadmap.
But actually industries have always shared, or lots of industries, you were talking about the motor insurance database, the credit report, credit reference agencies, and actually, there are regulations around it, and there are lots of rules that govern it, and it works for the good, actually. They aren't allowed to use it for pricing, but they are allowed to use it to stop fraud. Okay, well, that's a social good, right? And so I think actually as these data sets get shared, get decentralized, get connected, I think there will be debates about that, but I think it's not an insurmountable problem.
No, but it is about use, isn't it?
I agree. In a sense, this isn't it's a new thing, but it's not a new problem in the sense that it's now just the way technology is moving, and we're talking about data, but the rules are the same as if it were, two companies sharing whatever they had on their lever arch files, right? I mean, it's just a bit bigger and more nebulous.
But we already do it.
Yeah.
I mean, moneysupermarket.com, whether you're buying your electricity, gas, or motor insurance or house, it's an open market. Everybody gets to see everybody else's price.
Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, I am Rich Nozaki from Atsumi Sakai. I'm a lawyer from some jurisdiction, not UK or Germany. I have a question about collection data, big data through Internet of Things, IoT. And I understand that in the age of IoT, there are sensors everywhere, on streets, in shopping centers, or in houses. For example, for sensors that sees the data of use of utilities, oil and gas, or electricity. And my question is about whether the traditional regime of personal data protection law can apply in ensuring that data subjects are aware of the purpose of use or privacy policy, etc. I understand that sensors in wearable devices or streets, those subjects cannot see privacy policies or purpose of use, or how the data collected from them that the subjects can be used. So how the traditional regime can handle this issue, and what is the approach from the industry?
Okay, so I think that was around the questions around, obviously, a little bit like we were talking about data and the awareness of the consumer that their data's being collected, whether it's wearable devices or sensors in the house. I think, first of all, Christian, can we just have a view maybe from the legal perspective, and then maybe Justin and the guys talk about, again, the customer journey and how you guys are dealing with that from an industry perspective.
Yeah, I mean, regarding data protection, we just have a new law, the General Data Protection Regulation, which was supposed to address all these issues. Now it does, I think, a mediocre job at that, but the requirements are clear. You have to inform, you have to get consent, and your question is how can that be done with the fact that there's so much data that is being collected? Well, there's no answer I can give other than it's the responsibility of whoever is collecting the data, and this is maybe the reason why you're clicking through so many I accept buttons every day. Yes, of course, you're not reading it, and I think it's also maybe part of the industry. It's also a challenge to lawyers to put these requirements in a system that is very clear, very transparent, and not just read the next 15 pages and then say I accept, because that's not really customer friendly. It's also not really helping in practice. You may be okay with complying with the law, but is anyone reading that? No, mostly not.
My view on I think it's a brilliant question. I mean, this Internet of Things is just, if we think the amount of data that's been created over the last 2 years, I mean, it's just unbelievable how much data. And I actually think, I'm not an expert on this, but I've thought about it quite a bit, and I actually think there will be two streams of data that come out of machines that I purchase or things that I purchase. And so let's say I purchase a new washing machine, for example, and that is a data connected, it's got certain, it's talking to the web, it's talking back to Miele or whoever's made it, right? That I think there will be then two streams of data. There will be the data that is actually what the machine owns and the manufacturer owns, right, about diagnostics or something like that. And then there will be a stream of data where it pertains to me as its owner, okay? And I think we will all start to think about, so it's a bit like this thing when you're asked, do you want to give app crash data back to the developers?
Yeah.
At the moment you have to opt into that, but I think the world is going to be in the future where this is a machine talking back to the people who are operating it and the people that have manufactured it. And that stream of data is their data to improve their products on. As soon as it goes above that line into something that interacts with me, then I think it comes into the current way that we think about things. I think there will need to be new regulations. But I think we'll have to, all of us, have a more fine-grained view of how this data is actually collected and what happens with it. And the vast majority of it, I think, will be like an iceberg. There'll be a small bit at the top that we'll all care about. Everything else will be collected all the time, and we won't even see it.
Right. The tricky thing about that particular two streams you talked about is that they're not black and white. So to go back to your washing machine example, or you could use a car example as well. But if you're talking about improving the efficiency, and let's just say it's a car, that because I know more about cars than washing machines. Let's just say that your engine goes, and that's quite expensive. Now, for someone who buys that particular car, it's good for them that you can make the engines more efficient, and therefore they don't break down as quickly, and so that's in your interests. But in order to do that, it's not just about getting sensor data from the telematics data and sensor data from the engine, but it's also about understanding how you, as a driver, drive, because to look at it, you've got to look at all the steps that lead to that failure, all the things that happened, and then collect that across the globe to understand common patterns that lead to that failure. So there's a grey area, because in order for them to do that, it's not just the engine details, but it's also your driving behaviour that plays a key part. So it's a tricky one.
Okay. That's great. Look, I'm going to have to bring it to a close. As a lawyer, leaving it in a grey area is always quite good. There's always wiggle room either way, so I'm quite happy with that. Look, I think I'm going to say thank you very much. If there are any more questions, I'm sure everybody will be around for a drink afterwards. So thank you everybody for listening, but most of all, thank you to the panel, Mike, Justin, Jason, and Christian. Thank you very much.